Tonight we drift back through the dim mists of antiquity, long before marble temples, long before Roman legions thundered across Europe, long before Jupiter hurls his thunderbolts from a painted dome. We begin in a softer age, if you can call it that, when the Italian peninsula is little more than rolling hills, tangled woods, and tiny clusters of huts balanced on riverbanks. The land is alive with the hum of insects, the trickle of springs, the calls of shepherds, and, at least in the minds of its earliest inhabitants, countless invisible presences. To them, every rock, every grove, every doorway might be occupied by a power you couldn't see, but one you ignored at your peril. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. The earliest Romans, and I mean before they even thought of themselves as Romans, live in a world without gods in the Greek sense. There are no thrones up on Mount Olympus, no flashy characters with family drama worthy of a soap opera. Instead, they know of powers called noumena. That word doesn't mean God so much as it means a presence, a will, a nod of consent from the invisible. A numen could live in a spring that gurgled up fresh water. Another might whisper in the grain as it pushed through the soil. Another clung stubbornly to a boundary stone between one man's field and his neighbor's. In this early vision, religion isn't about myths or stories. It's about respect. You don't gossip about the noumena. You simply acknowledge them. Sprinkle a little wine on the ground, whisper a prayer before stepping into a grove, keep your promises. These unseen forces might not have faces, but they notice. And this makes sense in a society still fragile. Picture those early Latin farmers. Their survival depends on fickle rains, vulnerable crops, and the animals they herd. If you believed that every step into the woods, every crack of thunder, every sudden gust of wind might be a sign from something greater than yourself, you paid attention. It was less about worship, more about not upsetting the balance. It's funny to think, but in the very beginning, Roman mythology has almost no mythology. It is practical, a cosmic etiquette guide more than an epic. And if you've ever tried not to anger a cat by moving their food bowl, you have a small sense of how those early Latins felt. One of the mainstream historical facts we know: archaeological digs around ancient Latium reveal small altars tucked into rural spaces, stone blocks where offerings of grain, milk, or even honey might be poured. These weren't grand shrines, they were functional, little "please don't smite my harvest" stations. And the people who lived in that world treated the boundary between sacred and mundane as paper thin. To cross a field without asking the spirit's permission, risky. To neglect the hearth fire at home, downright reckless. The hearth wasn't just a place for warmth and cooking, it was a channel to the unseen. Later, this would crystallize into the worship of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. But at this early point, she isn't yet a personality. She is fire itself, living, breathing, temperamental. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Scholars think that even mildew had its own protective spirit. Yes, mildew, the fuzzy green culprit you scrub off bathroom tiles. The Romans later called it Robigus, a deity specifically to ward off mildew that destroyed crops. Imagine praying to keep mold away from your wheat. Modern homeowners with damp basements might sympathize. Because the Roman mind doesn't separate the majestic from the trivial. For them, every force in life deserved a name, a ritual, and at least a polite nod. That's why later their pantheon becomes so sprawling and unwieldy. It grows from thousands of tiny, practical acknowledgments of nature's moods. Historians still argue whether this early spirit worship came entirely from the Latins themselves, or whether it was shaped by Etruscan and Greek influence from the very beginning. It's like trying to figure out which ingredient gave a stew its exact flavor when it's been simmering for centuries. But let's stay with these first farmers because they give us the foundation. Imagine them lighting a small clay lamp at dusk. The family gathers close, the fire crackling, shadows leaping on the mud brick walls. Before a single word of story about Jupiter or Venus, before poets and playwrights, there is silence and reverence. The fire is fed a little oil, maybe a crumb of bread. The noumena are watching. The family sleeps better knowing they've done their part. And this attitude, the mix of superstition, respect, and pragmatism, never quite leaves Roman religion. Later, when the myths grow grander, the rituals still keep their bureaucratic feel. The Romans are famous for their legalism, and even in matters of the sacred, you can sense them thinking, did we file the right offering paperwork with the gods today? The natural world, too, is full of omens. An owl's hoot at the wrong time of night, disturbing. A sudden storm blowing in, a message. Rome, before its gods, is a place where people read the world like a living text, desperately trying not to misinterpret. Even names reflect this. Early Romans are careful with language, thinking certain words carry power in themselves. The wrong phrasing of a prayer could cancel the whole thing. Later, the priestly colleges will codify exact formulas, but even in the beginning, the fear of saying it wrong lingers. It's religion by contract clause. If you don't check the fine print, don't be surprised if the crops fail. Let's not forget the rustic spirits of the land, the lares and penates, guardians of home and storeroom. They begin as vague presences, maybe ancestors watching over descendants. Each household tends to its own protective spirits, sometimes represented by little figurines kept near the hearth. Imagine rows of clay statuettes with wide eyes, painted in bright pigments, silently staring as you bake bread or argue with your spouse. Comforting? Maybe. A little eerie? Definitely. One more eccentric belief of this early era. Romans think every action, especially one with beginnings, needs divine approval. They even create deities just for starting things. Yes, there's a god for beginnings, Janus. He doesn't yet have the grand temples he'll enjoy later, but the seed of the idea is here. To begin without asking Janus's permission is like setting off on a road trip without checking if your car has gas. And so the Roman mind becomes cluttered, in the best way possible, with deities everywhere. Unlike the Greeks, who enjoy spinning dramatic tales of gods falling in love and waging wars, the Romans treat their gods like invisible civil servants. Respect them, appease them, don't ask too many questions. Picture a day ending in that early Latium village. The sheep are corralled, the cooking pots scraped clean, the fire dying low. Somewhere in the darkness, someone leaves a little bowl of milk out by the door. Why? Because maybe, just maybe, the spirit of the threshold appreciates the thought. If not, well, better safe than sorry. It is out of these humble gestures, these whispered fears and simple offerings that Roman mythology will one day blossom. A mythology that starts not with Jupiter's thunder, but with the creak of a door hinge, the sparkle of a brook, the hiss of a log collapsing in firelight. From mist and silence, Rome begins to imagine. The night stretches onward, and out of those earliest mists of nameless spirits, the Romans begin to give their myths a face. They do not leap straight to Jupiter hurling bolts or Venus gliding ashore on a seashell. Instead, they anchor their identity in a story of family, violence, and yes, a wolf who nurses abandoned infants. Few tales are as Roman as the legend of Romulus and Remus, and if you've ever heard the phrase, "Rome wasn't built in a day," well, Here's the story that explains why it was built at all. Long before the twins appear, the tale begins with a princess named Rhea Silvia. She is a Vestal virgin, sworn to chastity, which means her entire job is keeping Rome's eternal flame burning. Though, remember, at this point, Rome doesn't exist yet. She belongs to Alba Longa, one of the many small settlements dotting central Italy. Rhea Silvia is the daughter of Numitor, who is the rightful king. But as these things go, family politics ruin everything. Her uncle, Amulius, seizes the throne, banishes Numitor, and forces Rhea Silvia into the Vestal Order, thinking this will prevent her from producing any rival heirs. Clever move, except of course, the gods have other plans. Depending on which version you prefer, the twins she conceives, Romulus and Remus, are either the offspring of Mars, the god of war, or perhaps just the result of an unfortunate mortal encounter. Romans lean toward Mars. After all, wouldn't it be fitting for the founders of Rome to have war itself in their bloodline? Still, historians argue whether the Mars connection was an early element or something added later to give the story more divine sparkle. Either way, the pregnancy does not sit well with Amulius. When the twins are born, Amulius reacts with the sensitivity of a villain in a soap opera. He orders them drowned in the Tiber River. But as with many myths, the river is feeling charitable that day. The Tiber overflows its banks, flooding into marshy areas, and instead of carrying the twins away, the water gently deposits them near the base of the Palatine Hill. Here enters the star of the show, the she-wolf. The Latin word lupa can mean both she-wolf and, shall we say, a woman of ill repute. This has led to some wonderfully awkward scholarly debates. Was the wolf in the story truly an animal, or was it a poetic way of saying that a kindly woman of society's margins took in the children? We'll never know. But for the Romans, the image of the animal prevailed. They loved the wildness of it, the feral, untamed nature of their city's infancy. So in the myth, the she-wolf crouches down, lets the infants latch, and nourishes them. And what an image that is! Two tiny boys abandoned in the reeds, drinking the milk of a creature both feared and respected. Wolves were dangerous to shepherds, yet here one becomes the mother of Rome itself. It's myth-making at its finest. Turn your enemy into your parent, and suddenly your people are born from both danger and resilience. Eventually, a shepherd named Faustulus discovers the boys. He and his wife, Acca Larentia, herself sometimes rumored to be the lupa in question, raise them as their own. The twins grow up in a shepherd's household, surrounded by flocks, fields, and the kind of rough camaraderie that teaches resilience. They become strong, brash, and quick to fight. Of course, fate catches up. As young men, Romulus and Remus get into skirmishes with local herdsmen, and eventually they learn the truth of their origins. They return to Alba Longa, overthrow Amulius, and restore their grandfather Numitor to the throne. That might have been the end of the story, neatly tied up with a restoration of justice. But the twins are ambitious. They want their own city. So they return to the place of their miraculous survival, near the Palatine and Aventine hills. Here is where sibling rivalry escalates. The debate is simple: where to build and who gets to lead. You'd think they could just flip a coin, but Romans aren't so casual. They seek divine approval. The brothers agreed to watch the skies for omens of birds, a process called augury. Romulus claims to see 12 vultures, while Remus only sees 6. Whether Romulus cheats or genuinely wins depends on which ancient author you believe. Historians still argue whether the vulture count was meant literally, or whether the entire augury episode was just a poetic way to justify Romulus's eventual dominance. Regardless, Romulus comes out on top. He begins marking out the boundaries of his new city on the Palatine Hill. Remus, in an act of defiance, or maybe just brotherly teasing, jumps over the line. Romulus, with all the patience of a man cutting ribbon on opening day, kills him. The first blood spilled on Rome's soil is fratricide. It's a grim start, but also very Roman. The city's myth of origin is not gentle. It is about strength, ambition, and sacrifice. Romulus names the city after himself, Rome, not Rheme. Imagine if Remus had won. We might today be talking about the glory of Rheme. It doesn't quite have the same ring. Romulus becomes the first king of Rome, and he sets about building not just walls, but people. According to legend, the early city has a problem: too few women. Romulus organizes the infamous Rape of the Sabine Women, which, despite the name, is as much about forced marriage and political alliance as anything else. The Sabine women, taken during a festival, eventually broker peace between their birth families and their new husbands. It's messy, uncomfortable, and utterly Roman in its mixture of violence and pragmatism. The myth serves a purpose. It explains why Rome is a mix of peoples, why it is strong enough to endure fratricide, and why its destiny is to dominate. Even at its birth, the story insists, Rome is both brutal and resilient. Now, let's pause for a quirky tidbit. There's a festival in Rome called the Lupercalia, held each February, which some say connects back to the she-wolf and the twins. During it, priests called Luperci would run around the Palatine Hill, lightly striking women with strips of goat hide. Supposedly this promoted fertility. Think of it as the world's least romantic Valentine's tradition. Even Julius Caesar had to watch his wife Calpurnia get tapped with goat leather, all in the name of children. And yes, historians still debate whether the Lupercalia really tied back to Romulus and Remus, or if later Romans simply enjoyed connecting their wildest myth to their wildest myth. Either way, the story of the twins bleeds into ritual, shaping how Romans thought of their own beginnings every year. Romulus, for his part, rules until he disappears. Accounts vary. Some say he is murdered by jealous senators who chop him into pieces in the fog. Others say he simply vanishes in a thunderstorm, whisked to heaven to become the god Quirinus. Romans, always fond of a good mystery, prefer the latter. Their founder transformed into a divine guardian of the state. And so the myth of Rome's birth solidifies. From abandoned infants to wolf's milk to fratricide and kingship, the story is a cocktail of survival, ambition, and divine favor. It sets the tone for everything to come. Rome is destined. Rome is chosen. Rome is born in blood and raised in wolf's milk. As night deepens, think of that image again. The she-wolf standing over two squirming babies, the reeds bending in the river breeze, the faint sound of water trickling over stones. Out of that moment, one of history's greatest civilizations begins to tell its story. The flicker of your imagination still glows from that riverbank where two tiny twins once cried under the wolf's watchful eyes. Now, centuries slide quietly forward. The little settlement on the Palatine Hill has grown into a city, mud huts giving way to tiled roofs, shrines turning into temples. Rome begins to lift its gaze from the soil toward the sky. The spirits of doorways, fields, and hearths, the noumena of that earlier age, start to take shape. They acquire names, stories, and very soon faces borrowed from neighbors who have already built entire pantheons. Because Rome, as it expands, doesn't just conquer land, it conquers culture. And before the legions march east or west, Rome's earliest encounters are much closer to home. Etruria, the mysterious civilization to the north, and the Greek colonies along the southern coast. Each of them brings a flood of ideas, symbols, and divine personalities. If you were a Roman living in the 6th century BCE, your religious world would feel like an elaborate patchwork quilt. You'd have inherited the rustic rituals of your ancestors, but you'd also be attending ceremonies that look suspiciously Etruscan and hearing myths that sound distinctly Greek. The noumena, those faceless presences of old, begin to take human form, sculpted in bronze and painted on temple walls. The Etruscans in particular are Rome's first real teachers in religion. They are a fascinating people, skilled metalworkers, levers of divination, and, according to ancient gossip, experts at interpreting lightning. For them, the sky is like a living document written by the gods. Every flash, every rumble, every split second between thunderclaps has meaning. Romans eat this up. Soon they are adopting Etruscan methods for reading the divine mood, especially through the discipline called haruspicy, examining the entrails of sacrificed animals for omens. It sounds grotesque, but to the Romans, it's as normal as checking the weather forecast. If the liver has a blemish in the northwestern quadrant, that might mean Jupiter is in a foul mood. And this is a mainstream historical fact. Archaeologists have uncovered Etruscan liver models, small bronze replicas of sheep livers etched with divine names and zones used as teaching tools for trainee priests. Imagine a medical student, but for reading divine organs. Rome loves the precision of it. The early kings, especially Tarquinius Priscus and Tarquinius Superbus, both of Etruscan descent, turn Etruscan rituals into the official language of state religion. They established priests, augurs, and the framework of temple construction. The Capitol itself, the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, is designed in the Etruscan style, with deep porches, painted terracotta statues, and triple celle for Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. These three will soon dominate Roman religion, the Capitoline triad. Jupiter, of course, becomes the thunder-wielding father of gods, Juno, the protector of women and marriage, and Minerva, the embodiment of wisdom and craft. But their origins are a little hazy. Were they purely Etruscan or imported Greek deities with new Latin names? Historians still argue whether Rome's Great Triad was a local development or an Etruscan interpretation of earlier Greek models. It's an academic tug-of-war that's been going on for centuries. Regardless of who deserves credit, something enormous is happening. The transformation of noumena into gods with distinct personalities. And like many cultural evolutions, it's not an overnight affair. It's more like clay softening under gentle rain. Meanwhile, from the south, the Greeks of Magna Graecia, those coastal colonies in places like Cumae, Tarentum, and Neapolis, modern Naples, bring with them a flood of mythology. They have temples, Homeric stories, and theatrical flair. When Roman traders and soldiers mingle with them, it's like discovering an entire library of ready-made deities. And the Romans, ever practical, think, why reinvent the divine wheel? They borrow freely, but they also translate everything into Latin terms. Zeus becomes Jupiter, Hera becomes Juno, Poseidon becomes Neptune, Mars becomes Mars, Aphrodite becomes Venus, and so on. But don't imagine it as simple copy-pasting. Rome doesn't just import Greek gods wholesale, it reinterprets them, reshaping them to fit its own identity. For example, Mars, while associated with the Greek Ares, isn't just a war god. He's also a protector of crops, a guardian of fertility, a symbol of civic virtue. Romans make their gods work overtime. The blending creates curious overlaps. Venus inherits much of Aphrodite's glamour and romance, but she also becomes a patroness of practical love, family continuity, legitimate marriages, even state alliances. It's like she trades the Greek sea foam and golden girdle for a Roman ledger and public reputation. Here's where a quirky tidbit emerges. The Romans are so enthusiastic about equating their gods with Greek ones that by the late Republic they keep lists, literal cheat sheets, of which deity matches which. Cicero even writes about the confusion, joking that by the time the philosophers finish explaining, half the gods might need to retire for redundancy. Still, amid all the borrowing, some distinctly Roman notes persist. Jupiter remains obsessed with oaths and law. He's not just a thunder thrower, he's the embodiment of pietas, duty, and loyalty. That sense of duty runs deep in Roman veins, from family to army to empire. The Etruscans also leave their stamp on the afterlife. They picture death not as punishment, but as a journey, with elaborate tombs decorated like living rooms. The Romans adopt the tone, if not the artistry. For them, the dead are part of the household still. The Lares and Penates, those domestic spirits, don't vanish in the glitter of new gods. They survive quietly, tucked behind doors and altars, reminding families where they came from. Picture an ordinary Roman household in this transitional age. Outside, grand temples are rising, their columns dazzling in sunlight. Inside, a woman sprinkles flour on the hearth fire, murmuring to Vesta. A small figurine of Jupiter sits nearby, but next to it are older, faceless tokens, ancestors and local spirits, the ghosts of that pre-divine era. Rome carries both, the old and the borrowed. The Greeks also introduce storytelling as part of religion. Myths become entertainment, philosophy, and moral teaching. The Romans, not to be outdone, begin weaving their own interpretations, stories that glorify discipline and destiny over passion and chaos. In Greek myths, heroes often rebel against the gods. In Roman ones, heroes obey. Even their myths feel orderly. Take Aeneas, for example, a hero borrowed directly from Homer. The Greeks tell of his escape from Troy, but it's Roman poets like Virgil who will later turn him into a national ancestor, the obedient servant of fate. Through Aeneas, the Romans find their link between Greek legend and their own destiny. And so, through centuries of mingling, borrowing, and blending, the Roman pantheon evolves from whispers in the woods to a full celestial bureaucracy. The gods now have families, rivalries, offices, and job descriptions. They have temples, priests, and official feast days. Yet, under it all, you can still feel the pulse of those old noumena, those invisible presences that never fully left. If you've ever built a playlist by mixing other people's music but somehow made it sound uniquely yours, that's what Rome does with religion. Etruscan drums, Greek melodies, Latin lyrics. It all comes together in something unmistakably Roman. As the city grows into a republic, the gods become tools of unity. Jupiter's temple gleams on the hilltop, sacrifices rise in smoke, augurs lift their eyes into the sky to interpret bird flight. The divine world has become structured, monumental, almost bureaucratic, but the sense of awe remains. And somewhere in a corner shrine, a tiny clay figure of a wolf still watches, reminding the Romans that long before they borrowed anyone's gods, they had their own wild, homegrown myth of survival. The morning of Rome's divine imagination dawns bright and solemn. The city is no longer just huts and hilltops. It has marble altars now, priests in gleaming robes, and statues with the serene smiles of eternity. At the summit of this world sits Jupiter, king of the gods, keeper of oaths, wielder of thunder, and perhaps the most Roman of all divine inventions. He is not new, of course. The Greeks had Zeus before him, the Etruscans had Tinia before that, and somewhere back in the shared Indo-European past there was a primal sky father whose thunder frightened and protected in equal measure. But Rome has a way of taking an old name, dusting it off, and giving it a toga. Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Jupiter the best and greatest, is less a wandering mythic lover like Zeus and more a divine bureaucrat, the celestial embodiment of law, order, and authority. Imagine standing on the Capitoline Hill, the city humming below. The temple of Jupiter rises before you, vast and radiant, its triple cella housing Jupiter himself, his queen Juno, and wise Minerva. The roof glitters with gilded terracotta, and colossal statues guard the steps. Every stone, every column, every chime of the priest's bronze bell announces the same message: Jupiter is watching, Jupiter protects, and Jupiter keeps Rome honest, at least theoretically. To the average Roman, Jupiter isn't just a distant deity of the clouds. He's present whenever oaths are made, whenever treaties are sworn, whenever generals lift their swords before battle. To swear falsely under Jupiter's gaze is not just immoral, it's cosmic perjury. In a society that runs on contracts, vows, and public office, that's no small matter. Romans say, "By Jupiter," the way some modern people say, "I swear," except with more thunder implied. And thunder truly is his language. When lightning strikes, it's considered Jupiter's handwriting, divine punctuation across the sky. Romans employ specialists called fulgurators and augurs to read these strikes, where they land, from which direction they come, even whether they hit a temple or a tree. There's a formal system for this. If Jupiter's bolt destroys your house, it's not bad luck, it's a divine memo. The state might even declare the site religiosus, meaning it belongs now to Jupiter, not you. Talk about losing your property to higher powers. One mainstream historical fact: the Romans took this lightning business so seriously that the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill had a special chamber, the bidental, for objects or sites struck by lightning. They were ritually purified and fenced off as sacred. You couldn't just sweep up and rebuild, you had to treat the strike as Jupiter's personal graffiti. Yet Jupiter isn't merely a sky god. He's the embodiment of fides, trust, loyalty, the glue of Roman society. In his role as Jupiter Fidius, he oversees promises and friendships, from military alliances to personal loans. Senators, generals, and even humble merchants invoke him when making deals. The Roman Republic, for all its political chaos, leans heavily on Jupiter's divine brand of accountability. You might betray a man, but betray Jupiter, and your name is toast. The same sense of sacred duty extends to Rome's wars. Before a legion marches out, sacrifices are made to Jupiter Stator, Jupiter the Stayer, who is believed to halt armies in retreat and stiffen wavering courage. His temple stands as a reminder that even the bravest soldiers need divine backbone. When they win, the victorious general ascends the Capitoline in a triumphal parade, crowned with laurel, his chariot wheels creaking up the hill to offer the spoils of war to Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Picture the scene: trumpets blaring, elephants trundling, banners waving, crowds shouting, the air thick with incense and dust. The general turns to face the great statue of Jupiter, a massive bearded figure with a thunderbolt in one hand and a scepter in the other. The general murmurs thanks, knowing full well that in the eyes of Rome this victory belongs to Jupiter first, and only secondly to himself. And if the general grows too proud, well, there's a quiet Roman safeguard for that. During the triumph, a slave stands behind him, whispering in his ear, "Remember, you are mortal." Jupiter doesn't share his thunder easily. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Jupiter's sacred bird is the eagle. You've seen it everywhere, on Roman standards, coins, and imperial emblems. But the reason is charmingly practical. The eagle, flying highest, was believed to carry prayers up to Jupiter's domain.
Later, when legions march with eagle standards, they aren't just symbols of Rome, they're literal couriers of divine favor. Lose your eagle in battle, and you've lost not just your pride, but your connection to the heavens. Legionaries risk their lives to retrieve fallen eagles, which makes sense when you imagine Jupiter glaring down, tapping his foot impatiently. Yet even kings of gods have their bureaucratic subdivisions. Jupiter has many epithets, each marking a different responsibility. Jupiter Tonans, the Thunderer; Jupiter Victor, the Victorious; Jupiter Feretrius, receiver of spoils; Jupiter Latiaris, of the Latin League. It's like an overworked executive juggling too many email chains. Romans adored this specificity. To pray properly, you had to address the correct version of Jupiter. Otherwise, you risked misdelivery, like sending your heavenly request to the wrong department. Historians still argue whether this proliferation of titles was an organic development or a deliberate political move to unify Rome's many local cults under one cosmic CEO. Either way, Jupiter becomes less a single god and more an umbrella brand for divine governance. And governance is exactly the point. In Jupiter's shadow, Roman religion and Roman politics fuse. Every Senate meeting, every declaration of war, every oath of office begins with ritual homage to him. The Republic's very legitimacy rests on his invisible thunderbolt. When Julius Caesar later claims descent from Venus, it's impressive, but Jupiter remains the state's moral backbone, the power no one dares rival outright. Even as empire replaces republic, emperors keep Jupiter's favor close. Augustus rebuilds his temple. Domitian calls himself Jupiter's earthly companion, and coins shimmer with images of the god handing thunderbolts to mortals as if licensing them for temporary rule. Rome's rulers may change, but Jupiter remains the ultimate term limit. Despite his regal stature, Jupiter is curiously aloof in myth. He's not as mischievous or romantically entangled as Zeus. Roman poets clean him up, make him respectable, even a little dull. But that's the point. Rome doesn't want its supreme deity scandalized. Jupiter isn't meant to charm, he's meant to command. And yet, the ordinary worshiper still finds comfort in his constancy. Farmers pray to him for rain, sailors for calm winds, judges for clarity. In every rumble of distant thunder, they hear not chaos, but reassurance, the sky speaking Latin. When evening falls on the Capitoline, the temple torches flicker against marble walls. Priests in white tunics move quietly, offering incense, murmuring precise Latin formulas so old even they barely understand the words. The air smells of myrrh and lightning about to break. Somewhere outside, a storm gathers over the hills. The first flash splits the clouds, and for an instant all of Rome, its temples, streets, and sleeping citizens, is illuminated. Thunder follows, rolling across the sky like a drumbeat of divine authority. The people nod. Jupiter is awake. The city, bound by its oaths, sleeps safely beneath his gaze.
Evening settles over Rome, soft and warm, and with it comes the faint scent of hearth smoke, winding between rooftops. The thunder of Jupiter still hums in the distance, but here, in the flickering quiet of home and temple, another kind of power reigns, one that doesn't roar or flash, but glows. It is the power of Juno, Vesta, and the quiet divinities who keep Rome's pulse steady. If Jupiter rules the sky, then Juno rules everything beneath it that breathes, binds, and bears life. She is queen of the gods, wife of Jupiter, and mother to the Roman people, though wife means something different in divine politics. Juno isn't a docile consort, she is the equal half of power.
Her domain is marriage, yes, but marriage as an institution of order, inheritance, and honor, not the tender domestic ideal it later became. To Romans, marriage is a civic duty, a pact that ensures lineage, alliances, and social balance. So when brides cross the threshold into their husband's home, they whisper prayers to Juno Pronoba, protector of marriage bonds. And when women labor to bring new citizens into the world, they call to Juno Lucina, the bringer of light, whose touch guides infants safely into the open air. In every Roman woman's life, Juno is both shadow and mirror, stern, watchful, powerful. Her temperament reflects the city's itself, proud, sometimes jealous, but always unyielding. In myth, she's been portrayed as tempestuous, even vindictive, but that's only because she embodies Rome's fierce instinct to preserve its order. She is in a sense the divine matron of the state. While Jupiter hurls thunderbolts to protect Rome's walls, Juno guards the wombs, oaths, and households that fill those walls with life. Walk now toward her temple on the Aventine Hill. It gleams in moonlight, quiet but immense, filled with the scent of olive oil and myrtle. Her statue stands tall, silver white, her eyes wide and stern, holding a scepter in one hand and a peacock feather in the other. The peacock being her sacred bird, its jeweled tail an emblem of watchful majesty. Offerings of milk, honey, and doves rest at her feet. But Juno is not alone in this nocturnal world, for in every Roman home burns another goddess's fire, the eternal Vesta, keeper of the hearth flame. She has no throne, no peacock, no thunder. She does not stride through myths like Juno or Mars. Instead, she abides. She flickers softly where families gather, where pots simmer, where hands warm themselves after a day's labor. To the Romans, fire is life, and Vesta is that life made divine. Her flame is pure, clean, and eternal, symbolizing both the heart of the household and the heart of Rome itself. The city's main temple of Vesta sits in the Forum, round and domed like a miniature sun, housing the sacred fire that must never go out. If it does, it is said, the city will fall. Within the circular sanctuary, 6 maidens move silently through the smoky light, Rome's most sacred servants, the Vestal Virgins. Chosen as children, these priestesses live apart from ordinary life, bound to 30 years of chastity and duty. Their days are a rhythm of tending the flame, performing purifications, and safeguarding Rome's luck. Each Vestal is honored and feared. To see one in the street is a sign of fortune. To harm her is death. Yet the slightest neglect of duty, letting the fire die, or breaking her vow, brings terrifying consequences. Roman law treats her failing as not just personal sin, but cosmic betrayal. The punishment is as ritual as it is cruel. The guilty Vestal is buried alive, sealed in a chamber with a lamp, a loaf of bread, and a cup of water, enough to die without technically shedding blood, which would defile the purity of her office. The people mourn, but the logic is cold. Rome's survival depends on the flame, and on the women who keep it alive. There's something hauntingly beautiful about that devotion. In a civilization of soldiers and emperors, these quiet priestesses hold the state's breath in their hands. Every dawn they offer incense and wine to Vesta, whispering ancient prayers whose words are older than Latin itself. And when the hearth fire leaps, Rome exhales again, safe for another day. For ordinary Romans, Vesta's presence extends far beyond the temple. Every home has its own small hearth, and by it a shrine to the Lares and Penates, household spirits of ancestors and provisions. They are the invisible company of the living, protectors of the pantry, guardians of the door, listeners to whispered prayers. When a child is born, when a traveler returns, when dinner is set upon the table, the family pours a few drops of wine into the fire and murmurs a blessing. Thus, the empire's cosmic architecture mirrors its domestic one. Juno protects the bonds of people, Vesta protects the bonds of flame. Together, they form the quiet counterweight to Jupiter's thunderous authority. Without them, the state's grandeur would collapse into noise. Historians often note that these female divinities reveal a distinct Roman tension: the public and private spheres, the masculine and feminine energies that together keep Rome upright. Jupiter's power is outward: law, war, empire. Juno's and Vesta's are inward: continuity, nurture, purity. But one cannot exist without the other. A temple without a hearth is as hollow as a household without order. Even emperors understood this. Augustus, the self-declared restorer of Rome's moral fabric, made the Temple of Vesta central to his own home on the Palatine Hill. He built it not as a decoration, but as a statement that the empire's fate still rested on the humble flame that once burned in shepherds' huts. There's a quiet poetry in that image, the emperor of the world kneeling before a hearth fire, offering wine and grain like a peasant's wife. In that act, power becomes piety, and the divine returns home. Outside, the city's night deepens. The streets grow still, except for the distant footsteps of watchmen and the soft rustle of olive trees. In some upper room, a woman stirs the last coals of her family hearth, whispering thanks to Vesta. Across the hills, a vestal does the same for the city's eternal flame. And between them, between the humble and the sacred, the same light flickers, small but unending. By dawn, smoke rises again above the forum, a thin silver thread that joins heaven and earth. The empire will rise and fall, but as long as that thread endures, Rome will feel eternal. Morning light spills over Rome, gold as ripened grain, and for once the air smells not of incense or iron, but of damp soil freshly turned. It's an odd scent to find in a city so steeped in marble and blood. But Mars, the red god of war, began not with swords, but with furrows. To modern ears, Mars is all battle cries and shining armor, the Roman answer to Greece's Ares. Yet if you peel back the layers of conquest and legend, you find a quieter origin. Before he was a warrior, Mars was a farmer's god, a guardian of fertility and spring. He was invoked not only for victory, but for growth, for fields to bloom and herds to thrive. It makes a kind of sense. The Romans were never far from their land. Even in their most violent centuries, their empire fed on wheat, olives, and vines. Their soldiers were farmers first, men who traded plows for spears when duty called. To them, Mars wasn't merely a patron of battle. He was the rhythm of the seasons, the fierce energy that made both life and war possible. Walk through an early Roman village, somewhere along the Tiber, before the empire, before marble temples. You'd find shrines to Mars standing not in fortresses, but on field edges. Farmers would pour out wine, lay garlands, and chant old, unpolished hymns, asking Mars to drive away disease and spare the growing corn. These aren't prayers of conquest, they're acts of protection. The god's violence was a shield for fertility, not its enemy. And then, when the fields had grown tall and the harvest was safe, Mars received his share again, not as bloodshed, but as gratitude. The people would offer spelt grain, a suckling pig, or even the first fruits of the season. It's a reminder that to ancient minds,
War and agriculture weren't opposites. They were two halves of the same cycle, destruction that makes space for growth. Over time, though, Mars put on armor. Rome grew hungrier, its borders wider. Farmers became legions, their fields became frontiers. And Mars, the same god who once blessed plows, now blessed swords. Still, his roots never vanished. Even when generals invoked his name before battle, they carried his older meaning with them. To fight for Rome was to fight for home, for the fields and hearths behind the front lines. Every campaign was, at least in myth, an act of civic gardening, clearing the wild lands so Rome could plant order. His main temple, the Temple of Mars Ultor, stands in the Forum of Augustus, gleaming white and gold. Ultor means the Avenger. Augustus built it to honor Mars for avenging Julius Caesar's assassination, but the name carries deeper resonance. Mars, the avenger of wrongs, restorer of order, guardian of Rome's destiny. Within its colonnades, soldiers prayed for strength, statesmen swore oaths, and generals displayed their triumphal spoils. But far from the marble heart of the city, other rituals endured. In March, the month named for Mars, the year began anew with festivals that mixed war and renewal. The Etruria celebrated him with horse races by the Tiber. The Mamoralia marked the old year's departure with the beating of a man dressed in animal skins, symbolically driving out the forces of decay. And the Armistrilium, at the end of October, purified the weapons of the soldiers returning home. War and farming, beginning and end, it was all one story told in seasons. Picture, if you can, the ceremony of the October horse. On the Ides of October, Rome's people gathered in the Field of Mars, a flat expanse outside the city walls, named for the god himself. Two teams of horses thundered down the track, their manes flying, their breath clouding in the crisp air. The winning horse, only one, was sacrificed to Mars. Its head was fought over by two city neighborhoods, each believing that possession brought prosperity for the coming year. It's brutal, yes, but also oddly hopeful. The sacrifice was not wanton, it was cyclical, the old year yielding to the new, the lifeblood of the earth refreshed by motion and ritual. Historians still argue whether this rite began as an agricultural offering or a military one, perhaps both. The Roman mind didn't separate the fertile from the martial. Plowing a field and leading a legion both required discipline, courage, and endurance. Even Mars's family reflects this dual nature. His divine lover is Venus, goddess of love and beauty, a strange pairing, but also a symbolic one. From their union comes harmonia, the embodiment of balance between passion and restraint, love and strife. The Romans saw in this myth the hope that war and peace might somehow coexist. Mars's children, however, are less gentle. Chief among them are Romulus and Remus, those wolf-suckled founders of the city. Through them, Mars becomes not only a god of blood and soil, but the literal father of Rome. Every Roman soldier thus sees himself as kin to Mars, a descendant of divine strength and duty. When they marched under standards bearing his image, they weren't just invoking protection, they were acknowledging ancestry. But even in war, Mars is strangely noble. Unlike Ares, who delights in chaos, Mars fights with purpose. His violence has direction, ethics, and hierarchy. The Roman ideal of war is not madness, but discipline. Virtus, manly virtue, expressed in courage, loyalty, and restraint. A true soldier serves not for glory, but for duty, defending the peace that others may till their fields. That's why Mars's festivals often involve purification rather than frenzy. Soldiers cleanse their weapons and bodies before battle, not to excite the god, but to honor him.
Even blood must be ordered in Rome's world. One of the oldest rituals tied to Mars is the Salian dance, performed by 12 priests known as the Salii. Dressed in archaic armor, they leap through the streets in springtime, clanging bronze shields and chanting songs so old that even in Cicero's day no one understood the words. The rhythm is infectious, part military drill, part ecstatic trance, and as they dance, the city wakes. The Salii are said to carry sacred shields sent from the sky by Mars himself, one original and 11 copies made to protect it. These shields, the ancilia, represent divine legitimacy, the protection of the state's soul. Now imagine the echoing clang of those shields in the dawn air. The people watch, smiling faintly, children mimicking the dancers' steps, and somewhere in the crowd a farmer on leave from the frontier feels something stir, a memory of home, of soil and sweat and a god who blesses both war and harvest. Mars's presence extends beyond temples and rituals. His very name is woven into daily life. Martius, the month of March; Martialis, the warrior's epithet; Campus Martius, the great training ground that will later host theaters, baths, and gardens. Even today, Mars lives on. Every time the red planet gleams in the night sky, every time the word martial is spoken. But perhaps the most revealing image of Mars comes from the countryside. In spring, farmers still mark their borders with stones and dedicate the boundaries to Terminus, another god of protection. Yet behind every offering, every whispered prayer, lurks Mars's shadow, for it is he who defends the land from chaos, whether that chaos comes in the form of weeds, wolves, or enemies. Roman poets sensed this duality too. Ovid calls Mars the bright defender of the plow. Virgil, in his Georgics, weaves him into the cycle of planting and battle, seeing no contradiction between the two. To live, to grow, to build Rome, these all require struggle. The sword and the sickle both draw lines through the earth. And so as night falls again, picture Mars not on a battlefield, but in a field of wheat. His armor gleams red beneath the sunset. His hand rests not on a weapon, but on the haft of a plow. Around him, cicadas sing. The air smells of iron and rain. He is the god of boundaries, the force that keeps wildness at bay, the tension between life and death that makes civilization possible. In his gaze, every Roman soldier sees the farmer he once was, and every farmer sees the soldier he might yet become. The city sleeps under his protection. The fire of Vesta flickers, Juno's peacocks roost, and somewhere beyond the walls, the fields whisper his name in the wind. Mars, guardian of Rome, giver of both seed and sword. The air feels heavier tonight, touched by the salt of distant waves and the faint hum of wind over water. Though Rome is no seaside town, the empire's pulse stretches toward the sea, toward trade, conquest, and the soft shimmer of horizons that never end. It is here, between land and tide, that two of Rome's most alluring gods make their entrance: Neptune, lord of the deep, and Venus, the goddess who rose from its foam. Rome's earliest farmers knew the rivers long before they dreamed of oceans. They depended on them for irrigation, for trade, for survival. And so the god they first worshipped was not Neptune, but Numicus, the spirit of a local river, or Tiberinus, the shining soul of the Tiber itself. These were modest deities, protectors of nearby water, not endless seas. But as Rome grew restless, expanding from huts to city, from city to empire, its gaze turned outward, and the god of rivers became the god of the whole sea. Neptune was borrowed, as so many things in Roman religion were, from neighbors who had already named the waves. From the Etruscans came Nethans, a god of wells and freshwater springs. From the Greeks came Poseidon, lord of the sea, horses, and earthquakes. Neptune emerged from their union, a Roman hybrid, practical yet powerful, rough-hewn but regal. The Romans rarely made their gods whimsical. Where the Greeks saw poetry, the Romans saw function. Poseidon is tempestuous, a symbol of nature's wild moods. Neptune is more bureaucratic, the manager of tides, the patron of harbors and naval might. His trident is less a weapon of passion than a tool of authority, a symbol of dominion over an element Rome was determined to master. Still, he carries a certain elegance. In art, Neptune rides a chariot drawn by seahorses, his beard flowing like seaweed, his eyes calm and cold. Dolphins coil around his wheels, Nereids cling to his wake. At his feet, shells gleam like scattered coins. It's an image that suits Rome's later age of empire, when power and beauty intertwined beneath marble arches and aqueducts. Neptune's festival, the Neptunalia, is held in the sweltering heat of July, when the land is dry and rivers run low. Romans built temporary huts of leafy branches near the Tiber and feasted in the shade, drinking wine, cooling themselves with laughter. They prayed not for storm or conquest, but for rain. It was a reminder that Neptune ruled not only distant oceans, but the veins of water beneath the soil, the hidden sources that made survival possible. Archaeologists have found evidence that his temples often stood near springs or wells rather than ports. It's a small but telling detail. Neptune's earliest worshippers weren't sailors, but farmers, the same ones who called to Mars for fertile ground. For Rome, water was life first and sea second. And yet, as Roman ships began to conquer the Mediterranean, Neptune's character expanded. He became guardian of sailors and admiral of fleets, invoked before battles at sea. When Rome's navy triumphed over Carthage, the people credited Neptune with the victory. His trident now symbolized mastery of the Mare Nostrum, our sea, as Romans proudly called it. But Neptune never fully shed his quieter side. In the old prayers, he is asked not for storms, but for calm, not for vengeance, but for stillness. The Romans, practical as ever, preferred seas that obeyed rather than raged. Yet Neptune's realm holds more than salt and silence. It also carries the story of Venus, whose foam-born beauty changes everything she touches. Her name, Venus, already glows with softness, but her journey to Rome is one of the most elegant cultural migrations in mythic history. She began, of course, as the Greek Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and desire, born from the sea's foam after the Titan Cronus cast his father's severed parts into the waves. Yes, Greek myths were, let's say, creative with anatomy. From that violent froth rose the gentlest form, Aphrodite, stepping ashore upon a scallop shell, smiling as the west wind carried her to life. When Rome adopted her, they sanded down the sharper edges. Aphrodite's wild affairs, jealousies, and mischief became something more civic and refined. Venus was no longer merely a seductress or muse of passion. She became the divine embodiment of harmony, charm, and the creative power that brings people together. She was not just love but connection itself, the invisible glue of society. The first Romans who worshipped Venus saw her not as a lofty Olympian, but as a garden spirit. Her earliest form, Venus obsequens, presided over blooming flowers and fruitful marriages. She was the fragrance of blossoms, the blush of first love, the promise of fertility. Only later did she take on the grandeur of her Greek cousin. And what a transformation it was! Venus became mother of the Roman people, through her mortal son Aeneas, the Trojan hero who fled the burning city and founded the line that would lead to Romulus. Through her, Rome claimed descent from both the gods and the ashes of Troy. Every emperor, every senator could trace his mythic lineage back to her divine grace. It's a story that fuses politics and poetry in that uniquely Roman way, power sanctified by beauty. The goddess's most famous shrine, the Temple of Venus Genetrix, stood in Caesar's Forum. Genetrix means the mother, for Caesar claimed her as his ancestor through Aeneas's son Ulysses. It was more than a temple, it was a statement of legitimacy, a marble genealogy carved in divine light. Standing there, surrounded by columns and perfume smoke, one could almost believe Rome itself was born from sea foam and ambition. The goddess's influence rippled far beyond politics. She shaped Roman art, fashion, and even morality. The poet Lucretius begins his De Rerum Natura, a philosophical poem about atoms and nature, with a hymn to Venus, calling her the life-giving power who brings calm to men and beasts alike. To him, love is not weakness, but the principle that keeps the world from falling apart. Still, not everyone was at ease with her charm. Historians still argue whether Venus represented an ideal of virtue or a dangerous invitation to indulgence. She blurs the lines between devotion and desire, holiness and sensuality. It's telling that some of her titles, Venus Verticordia and Venus Cloacina, link purity and pollution, beauty and filth. She is both the fragrance of roses and the mud in which they grow. In that paradox lies her true power. Venus reminds Romans that the divine isn't always distant or austere. Sometimes it lives in touch, in warmth, in the simple act of being alive. Imagine now her meeting with Neptune, not in myth, perhaps, but in symbol. The god of the sea and the goddess born from it, one ruling the depths, the other rising from the surface. Together they embody balance, the vast, indifferent power of nature, and the intimate grace that softens it. There's an old Roman fresco found in Pompeii that captures this perfectly. Neptune and Venus reclining side by side, surrounded by sea creatures and cupids. His trident rests at ease. Her hand grazes a shell. Around them, waves curl like silk. It's both serene and suggestive, like the empire that painted it, disciplined, sensual, and quietly proud. Perhaps that's why Venus, more than almost any deity, never truly vanished. When the empire fell and the old temples crumbled, her image lived on in marble and story. Renaissance painters later rediscovered her as their muse. Botticelli's Birth of Venus, with its pale goddess on a seashell, is less a Christian vision than a Roman memory reborn in color. And Neptune? He too survives, his name whispered in the roar of waves, his statue still guarding fountains across Europe. Rome's aqueducts, with their carved dolphins and tridents, echo his blessing in stone. Every time water flows through a city, Neptune's old pulse stirs. You can almost feel it now. The sea's slow rhythm beneath the stillness of night, the faint taste of salt in the air, the whisper of waves carrying myths across centuries. Venus rises from the foam once more, serene and smiling. Neptune watches, steady as the tide. And together they remind us that even empires are shaped by the meeting of power and grace, by the balance between storm and softness, steel and silk, duty and desire. You begin to sense that in Rome, divinity isn't distant. It hums from every creaking hinge, every patch of moss glistening under the rain. After the thunder of Jupiter and the martial beat of Mars, the world softens again, not because the gods leave, but because they multiply, splitting into hundreds of gentle, nameless presences that never make it into epic poetry, but still govern nearly every motion of daily life. The Romans, practical as ever, never saw religion as a choice between belief and disbelief. It was an unbroken contract between humans and the unseen. You wake, stretch, and before you even leave your home, you've passed half a dozen divine jurisdictions. The threshold itself belongs to Janus, two-faced guardian of beginnings and endings. The moment you touch the door, you've already invoked him, even if you don't mean to. God of doors sounds almost trivial until you realize that for Romans, every doorway is a miniature portal between chaos and order, public and private, past and future. Step outside, and the street greets you with a quiet committee of divine specialists. There's Limentinus, the protector of thresholds, Forculus, god of doors, and Cardea, who looks after hinges. Yes, there's an actual hinge goddess. The Romans left nothing to chance. You might smile at the idea, but to them, each small divine function kept the universe in working order. When you believe the cosmos itself depends on careful ritual precision, even a rusty hinge deserves celestial attention. Roman piety is rooted in ritual, not faith, an exactness of offering and timing that binds the human world to the divine one. The formula matters more than the emotion. You might not feel particularly reverent, but if you pour wine in the proper way, say the words precisely, the cosmos listens. A misplaced syllable could offend a god. So priests often repeated whole prayers 3 times, just in case. And outside the cities, the landscape itself is alive. Farmers whisper to Robigus, spirit of wheat rust, begging him to spare their crops. They honor Flora, lady of blossoms, Pomona, keeper of fruit trees, Pallas, guardian of flocks, and Terminus, who literally is the boundary stone marking one's land. Each year, Romans crowned those stones with garlands and offered honey and wine, a gentle reminder to neighbors not to move the fence. Archaeologists suspect the practice also served as a low-key way to prevent land disputes, divine property law with decorative flair. The same logic applies to city life. There's Cloacina, goddess of the sewer system, her name derived from Cloaca, the great underground drain of Rome, the Cloaca Maxima. To us that may sound like a less than glamorous portfolio, but to Romans, sanitation was sacred. The health of the city depended on her favor. You could say she was the world's first wastewater engineer, with divine status. This idea that every task and space deserves a guardian builds a civilization of gratitude. You see, for the Roman, the sacred isn't locked in temples, but seeps into every tool, every routine. You clean your house, offer a crumb to Vesta's fire. You plant a seed, nod to Tellus, the earth. You cross a crossroad, toss a pebble to Laris Compitales, the little guardian spirit stationed where paths meet. These Lares are among the most beloved of all Roman spirits, cheerful, protective, and personal. Each family keeps a small shrine, called a laritarium, where the household lares stand painted or sculpted, often flanked by serpents, symbols of fertility and continuity. Before dinner, the head of the house might offer them a few drops of wine or a bite of bread. They aren't distant gods. They're like family members who never leave. Some Romans even described them as ancestors reborn, still watching, still guiding. And there are others, Penates, who guard the pantry and food supply, Genius, the personal divine essence of each individual. Manes, the spirits of the dead. For Romans, the afterlife isn't far away. The dead linger, not haunting, but harmonizing, joining the quiet network of minor powers that ensure life flows correctly. On the festival of Parentalia, families visit tombs, sharing food and wine with their ancestors in a picnic of remembrance. The living and the dead dine side by side, because boundaries, like everything in Roman myth, are porous. But still, historians argue whether these minor gods were truly believed in or simply honored out of habit. Did Romans really think Cardaea would curse a squeaky hinge, or was it just cultural insurance? Better safe than sorry. The line is thin. In a world where misfortune might signal divine displeasure, a small offering seems a fair price for peace of mind. And sometimes these tiny spirits grow. A local spring god becomes a city's patron. A household guardian turns into a hero of state religion. Many of Rome's later temples began as shrines to what we'd call micro-deities. Religion evolves by aggregation, one modest blessing at a time. Among the more charming figures is Silvanus, the rustic god of woods and boundaries. He's part protector, part prankster, fond of scaring shepherds and helping them in equal measure. Farmers left him offerings of milk and wine before harvests, muttering his name in twilight fields. His presence embodies Rome's rural heart, a reminder that the empire's might still sprouts from the soil. Then there's Faunus, a mischievous woodland spirit, often confused with the Greek Pan. He haunts forests and streams, his laughter echoing between tree trunks. The festival of Lupercalia, held in his honor, involves young men running through the streets with strips of goatskin, playfully striking women for fertility and luck. Historians still debate whether it's a fertility rite, a purification, or just an excuse for early Roman youth to sprint around half-naked in February. Given human nature, it might have been all three. But if these stories sound quaint or whimsical, they also reveal something profound. Romans feared emptiness. A space without spirit was dangerous. So they filled their world with presence, naming and negotiating every inch of existence. It wasn't superstition, it was infrastructure. Every gesture had meaning, every action a companion in the unseen. Imagine twilight in an ancient Roman home. Oil lamps flicker, shadows stretch across mosaic floors. A family gathers around the laritarium, a tiny niche glowing with light. The mother sprinkles wine on the little altar. The father murmurs the names of ancestors. A child watches wide eyes as the smoke curls upward. In that fragile moment between day and night, the house becomes the universe in miniature, a balance of light, warmth, and divine routine. Roman religion, in its essence, is this: a choreography of reverence. Even the smallest deities, gods of mildew, Robigo, of manure, Sterculius, of beans, Fabius Pater, remind mortals that everything, however humble, belongs to the cosmic contract. There's comfort in that predictability. You don't need to understand why life works, you just have to keep the ritual chain unbroken. Of course, not everyone followed the rules so precisely. The satirist Juvenal joked that the gods grow weary of so much incense. And by the late Republic, philosophers like Lucretius began to question the very existence of divine intermediaries, arguing that nature runs on its own laws. Yet paradoxically, even the skeptics kept the rituals, partly from habit, partly from affection for tradition. Rome was a place where belief and irony could coexist peacefully at the dinner table. Walk with me now through the streets of that bustling capital. You pass a crossroads shrine, a public fountain, a small marble plaque marked Sacrum. Offerings lie scattered, figs, coins, flowers. No one's quite sure which god presides here anymore, But no one dares clean it up either. The divine residue of centuries still clings to stone. You start to see how the great gods, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, sit atop a pyramid of invisible helpers. Rome's religion isn't just hierarchy, it's ecology. And in that web of power, the smallest thread still matters.
The Roman imagination could never leave something as important as mildew unsupervised. That's not devotion, that's quality control. As centuries pass, these spirits begin to merge, fade, or evolve, absorbed into a more Hellenized pantheon. Yet their echoes survive, in language, in superstition, even in how we bless a meal or knock on wood. The Lades whisper through time, guardians of every quiet moment we forget to honor. The air around you feels charged again, softly alive. You realize that in Rome, there are no empty rooms, no silent corners. Every breath is shared, every motion watched, every hinge has its goddess. Heroes, mortals, and myths. Rome could never resist polishing them until they gleamed in its own reflection. By the time Roman storytellers began shaping their legends, they inherited a vast, glittering warehouse of Greek myth, fully stocked with tragic kings, clever queens, and gods behaving badly. But Romans weren't content to just admire them. They wanted these stories to work for Rome. So they rewrote them, not to erase, but to adapt, to make them Roman. A myth wasn't just entertainment here. It was a moral manual, a history textbook, and a patriotic banner all in one. It begins, as so many Roman things do, with Aeneas. He's not exactly the flashiest hero in mythology, not like Achilles who rages across the battlefield, or Odysseus who tricks gods and monsters with sly words. Aeneas is steadier, quieter, the embodiment of pietas, the Roman virtue of duty to gods, family, and country. His legend starts in the ashes of Troy, when the city falls to the Greeks. The scene is chaos, smoke curling through temples, the shouts of soldiers echoing through the streets. But amid the ruin, Aeneas carries his aged father, Anchises, on his back and leads his young son by the hand. It's one of the most enduring images of Roman identity, a man literally bearing the past while guiding the future. That's what the poet Virgil will later make the centerpiece of the Aeneid, the story of Aeneas's flight from Troy and his long, weary journey to Italy, where he will become the ancestor of Rome itself. The gods are not idle in this tale. Venus, his mother, and Jupiter, his divine sponsor, steer him toward destiny. Juno, ever the troublemaker, does her best to block him at every turn. It's a myth that mirrors Rome's own story: endurance through hardship, divine favor earned by perseverance. Historians still debate whether Virgil's Aeneid is patriotic propaganda or quiet resistance, whether he's praising Augustus's new empire or subtly mourning what was lost in the process. Either way, Aeneas becomes the model Roman hero, dutiful, sober, and haunted. When he finally reaches Italy, Aeneas doesn't just settle down. He wages wars, builds alliances, and founds the lineage that will, generations later, lead to Romulus and Remus, the wolf-raised twins who literally build the city. Through Aeneas, Rome gets divine legitimacy. It can claim descent not only from heroic mortals, but from Venus herself, goddess of love and beauty. It's as if the cosmos has stamped Rome's birth certificate. This adaptation reveals a deep Roman instinct to root the present in a sacred past. The Greeks told stories for wonder. The Romans told them
for validation. They needed myths to explain why they ruled the world. And so, one by one, the Greek heroes crossed the sea, but not unchanged. Take Hercules, or, as Rome called him, Hercules Victor. His Greek labors already made him famous: the lion, the hydra, the golden apples. But when he arrived in Rome, he became something more grounded, a divine worker hero, honored at crossroads and shrines by merchants, soldiers, and farmers alike. In Rome, Hercules doesn't just fight monsters. He protects trade routes, guards travelers, and ensures oaths are kept. His temple by the Forum Boterium, the ancient cattle market, stands near the Tiber River, where legend says he once slew the monster Cacus, a fire-breathing thief who stole his oxen. After that victory, the Romans built him a round marble shrine, still standing today, weathered but serene. Interestingly, Hercules' worship in Rome may predate Greek influence altogether. Historians argue whether he entered Roman religion through Greek settlers, Etruscans, or even earlier Italic cults. What's certain is that by the late Republic, Hercules had become a Roman favorite, a god for the working man, the soldier, and the self-made hero. They loved him because he sweated. Unlike the aloof Olympians, Hercules was approachable, half god, half human, perpetually tired, yet always getting back up. He embodied the Roman idea that strength is nothing without endurance, and endurance in Roman eyes was divine. Another Greek hero who found a new home in Rome was Odysseus, reborn as Ulysses. But here, the Romans treated him more warily. To them, cleverness wasn't always a virtue. Ulysses was admired for his cunning, but distrusted for his deceit. The ideal Roman hero was stoic and steadfast, not slippery. Rome could appreciate intelligence, yes, but not when it smelled of trickery. This distinction says everything about Roman character. The Greeks valued brilliance and individuality. The Romans, duty and sacrifice. Where a Greek might see the triumph of wit, a Roman might see moral failure. Still, Rome didn't discard the Greek pantheon or its legends. It repurposed them. Apollo, god of light and prophecy, becomes a central divine symbol for Augustus himself. The emperor builds the great temple of Apollo Palatinus, aligning his reign with the god's clarity and order. Through such stories, myth becomes politics. Even the tragic heroes, Orestes, Medea, Theseus, slip into Roman retellings, reshaped for new audiences. Roman playwrights like Seneca give them darker, more psychological edges. Where the Greeks had chorus and catharsis, the Romans had confrontation and spectacle. Seneca's Medea, for example, becomes a chilling portrait of rage and control, less a cautionary myth than a reflection of imperial power. But Aeneas remains the centerpiece, the man who turns mythology into destiny. In Virgil's hands, his struggles become allegories of empire. Every storm he faces mirrors Rome's own civil wars. Every loss prefigures its resilience. Virgil's writing style even mimics the rhythm of Roman history, steady, dignified, unhurried. When Aeneas descends into the underworld and meets the spirits of future Romans, Romulus, Augustus, the heroes of the Republic, it's as if myth itself is giving birth to history. You can almost hear the poet whisper, "It was always meant to be." Still, beneath the grandeur, a trace of sorrow lingers. Aeneas achieves his fate, but at great cost. Love lost, blood spilled, peace bought through exhaustion. His story feels less like triumph and more like the weary sigh of a civilization that understands power always demands a price. And that's what makes Roman mythology uniquely poignant. It's not about chaos or whimsy, but about order and the emotional toll of maintaining it. Where Greek myths delight in defiance, Roman ones honor responsibility. They admire those who endure, who uphold the world's fragile balance, even when it breaks their hearts. But Roman imagination doesn't stop with Greek imports. It continues to weave local legends into its mythic fabric. Heroes like Horatius Cocles, who holds off an invading army at a bridge, or Musius Scaevola, who burns his own hand to prove his loyalty to Rome. These semi-historical figures blur the line between myth and patriotism. They're less about divine parentage and more about the iron will of Roman virtue. Rome, in short, manufactures its heroes the way it builds its roads, straight, sturdy, and leading somewhere useful. And yet there's warmth, too, in stories told by candlelight, in mothers reminding their children of the gods' favors, in laughter over Hercules' gluttony or Mercury's mischief. The myths may serve the state, but they also serve the soul. They connect ordinary lives to something vast and shimmering. Even today, echoes of that mythology survive in our language. We speak of Herculean efforts, of a person's genius from Guineas, their personal spirit, of being under Venus's spell. These are linguistic fossils, reminders of how deeply Roman myth once shaped daily life. In a world of empires and armies, myth was Rome's gentler power, a web of stories binding citizens to destiny. Every tale of heroism whispered, "You too are part of something eternal." And as the empire expanded, that mythic web stretched with it. Greek, Egyptian, Persian, all stories could be woven into the Roman fabric if they served the message, Rome endures because Rome is chosen. Still, one can help but feel a kind of longing between the lines, a melancholy awareness that heroes, even divine ones, carry loneliness with their glory. Perhaps that's why Aeneas, Hercules, and all the rest keep walking across the centuries, because every civilization, like every person, needs to believe its struggles are part of something sacred. In Rome, even destiny had paperwork, and the heroes filed it on time. The Roman year doesn't unfold. It pulses. It moves like a heartbeat made of drums, incense, and laughter. Every few days, something is sacred, something is happening. There's no such thing as an ordinary week in Rome. The calendar itself is a living being, breathing through festivals, sacrifices, and spectacular chaos. The empire may have built roads and aqueducts, but its true architecture is time, and time, in Rome, belongs to the gods. Step into it. The sun is rising over the forum. Smoke curls from altars, voices rise in chant, and you can already feel the day vibrating with ceremony. On the first day of January, for instance, when we now fumble with resolutions, Romans honored Janus, the two-faced god of beginnings. He gazes forward and backward, into the future and into the year just gone. Offerings of honey cakes and sweet wine ensure his favor. You want a sweet year? Start with a sweet taste. But this is only the beginning. The Roman calendar, especially after Julius Caesar's reform in 46 BCE, is dense with festivals. There are days marked Fausti for business, Nefasti for rest or rituals, and countless others half dedicated to some divine moment. In modern terms, it's like living in a perpetual loop of half workday, half holiday. Your boss is Jupiter, and the HR department is the priesthood. You could say the Romans perfected the art of the divinely mandated day off, and among these celebrations none glows brighter or wilder than Saturnalia. Imagine this. It's December, and the air in the city buzzes with mischief. Merchants close their shops, gambling tables appear in the open, and laughter spills from every doorway. Masters and slaves exchange roles. Slaves are allowed to speak freely, dine first, even mocked their owners. Everyone wears bright caps of liberty called pilei. Gifts are exchanged, candles, figurines, sweets. The festival honors Saturn, the ancient god of agriculture, who ruled during a mythical golden age of equality. Historians still argue whether Saturnalia began as a solemn winter solstice rite or as a carnival to mark the end of harvest. But by the late Republic, it's basically a Roman version of Christmas and Mardi Gras mashed together, sprinkled with chaos and mulled wine. Social rules relax, laughter reigns, and for a few brief days, the world turns upside down. The philosopher Seneca once grumbled about the noise, writing that he could barely hear himself think through the shouting outside. But even he joined in. How could you not? The Roman gods, for all their dignity, enjoyed a good party. Saturnalia reminded people that joy, too, was a form of worship. And then, as winter passes, the cycle resets. February arrives with the Lupercalia, one of Rome's oldest and strangest rituals, half sacred, half scandalous. It begins in a cave beneath the Palatine Hill, said to be the very place where the she-wolf nursed Romulus and Remus. There, priests called Luperci, dressed in goatskins and often nothing else, sacrifice goats and a dog, both symbols of purification. They then cut the hides into strips and race through the streets, striking anyone they meet with the soft thongs. Women especially step forward eagerly to be touched. It's said to promote fertility and ease childbirth. It's the sort of rite that makes modern readers blink twice, but in Rome, it's simply the rhythm of life, purity, luck, renewal, all expressed through speed, laughter, and goat leather. Historians still debate the origins of Lupercalia. Was it a fertility rite, a purification ceremony, a remnant of wolf cults from pre-Roman Italy? The answer likely is yes, and Rome had the habit of merging all its old stories into one usable celebration. And long after Christianity took root, the shadow of Lupercalia lingered, a whisper beneath the later Valentine's Day, which took its mid-February slot. But for now, in the Roman year, we move forward. March belongs to Mars, not just as a war god, but as a bringer of spring. Before armies marched, farmers did. The Etruria festival sees horses race along the Campus Martius, the field of Mars, to honor their divine patron. Prayers rise for fertile fields and strong soldiers alike. By April, joy returns in softer colors. There's Floralia, dedicated to Flora, the goddess of blossoms. Streets fill with flower garlands and bright costumes. Dancers perform comedies tinged with body humor, and everyone feasts on fresh fruit and wine. The historian Ovid describes it as a celebration of life's renewal, one that reminds the city to laugh again. Rome knows how to laugh. It also knows how to fear. When May comes, the mood shifts. Ghost month. During Lemuria, households honor the restless dead, tossing black beans over their shoulders at midnight, chanting, "With these beans I redeem me and mine." It's both eerie and intimate. The family patriarch walks barefoot through the house, cleansing it from wandering spirits. He never looks back. To do so would invite the ghosts to stay. Then comes June, named, of course, for Juno, goddess of marriage. Weddings bloom under her favor. In July and August, great games unfold. Ludi Apollinares, Ludi Romani. festivals filled with chariot races, theater, and spectacle. The Romans loved games almost as much as they loved omens. It was said the gods themselves watched from the stands, invisible, but entertained. And in October, as harvest ends and soldiers prepare to return from campaigns, the Armistrian honors Mars again, this time as the purifier of arms. Trumpets sound, torches blaze, and weapons are ritually cleaned and stored for winter. The military spirit rests temporarily. Between all these major feasts are countless local and domestic observances, anniversaries of temples, birthdays of gods, commemorations of victories. Even the emperor's own birthday becomes divine theater, blending civic pride with cosmic timing. To live in Rome is to live on a perpetual countdown to the next sacred moment. The calendar itself functions like an empire of meaning, each day governed by divine mood. There's a reason the word religio comes from ligare, to bind. Religion binds everything: work, love, harvest, trade, even rest. And not all feasts are joyous. Some, like Parentalia, are somber days of remembrance for ancestors. Families gather at tombs, bring wine and bread, and speak softly to the shades of the departed. It's both eerie and intimate. The family patriarch walks barefoot through the house, cleansing it from wandering spirits. He never looks back. To do so would invite the ghosts to stay. Even the mundane has ritual wrapped around it. A wedding isn't complete without calling on Juno and the Lares. A voyage begins with a libation to Neptune. A baby's first smile is greeted with offerings to Genius, the household spirit. You might think all this ritualism would grow tedious, that Rome's citizens must have sighed at yet another day of sacrifices. But the truth is more subtle. Ritual in a world without modern distractions is entertainment. It's spectacle and identity, community and comfort. You know what day it is because the gods tell you. And each festival offers release, a controlled dose of chaos. Saturnalia flips hierarchy. Lupercalia blurs modesty. Floralia celebrates abandon. It's the social system's built-in safety valve. By letting the world turn upside down for a few days, Rome ensures it will stay right side up the rest of the year. Even in the empire's farthest corners, soldiers and settlers carried the calendar with them. Archaeologists have found altars to Roman gods in Britain, Syria, and North Africa, each inscribed with familiar festival dates. The empire may have stretched across continents, but everyone still celebrated the same Saturnalia, proof that faith was as unifying as law. Sometimes the old gods absorbed new ones. In Egypt, Isis and Serapis joined the Roman cycle, their processions winding through the streets of Rome itself. In Gaul, local deities merged with Roman ones: Mars Lenus, Mercury Vesuvius. The calendar grew ever more crowded, a living museum of divine diplomacy. You might think the gods would be exhausted, juggling so many appointments, but for Romans, time wasn't linear. It was cyclical, layered, overlapping like echoes in a vast marble hall. Every festival recalled some mythic event, replayed again and again, reminding mortals that the past was never truly gone. At night, after the torches of Saturnalia die down, or the drums of Mars fall silent, a hush settles over the city. The smell of incense lingers, the cobblestones are littered with petals and wax. Somewhere a family still sings softly to their Lares. A few drunks argue over dice beneath a temple column. The stars above Rome gleam faintly, as if approving the mess below. It's said that Jupiter himself once looked down during Saturnalia and smiled, murmuring, "Even gods need a holiday." Maybe that's why Rome lasted so long. Not because of its armies or laws, but because it knew how to make the sacred feel human. Because it believed that joy, laughter, and ritual all came from the same divine fire, burning steadily in temples, in kitchens, in every beating Roman heart. The morning air of Rome feels lighter when a procession moves through its streets. Bells jingle from the necks of white oxen, polished bronze catches the sunlight, and priests in immaculate togas murmur chants in the oldest of Latin forms, words even they barely understand anymore. Every gesture is precise, practiced, ancient. Each nod toward a statue, each sprinkle of grain means something. It's theater, yes, but theater the gods are meant to watch. Religion here is not about faith, not quite. It's about correctness. Romans don't ask if the gods love them, they ask whether they followed procedure to the letter. If the omens disagree, the ritual must start over. The universe in Rome's eyes runs on bureaucracy. And that's where priests come in, not as philosophers or mystics, but administrators of the sacred. They are the pontifices, the bridge builders, supposedly forming a bridge between mortals and the divine. They maintain calendars, record vows, and ensure that no sacrifice is skipped because someone got distracted by, say, another barbarian invasion. They are record keepers, accountants of the supernatural, and their leader, the Pontifex Maximus, will one day be a title borrowed by popes. But tonight, as you stroll in imagination through the Roman Forum, another priestly figure catches your eye, one draped in bright crimson, face half covered with a veil. He's the Flamindialus, high priest of Jupiter. His life is so strictly regulated that he cannot even spend a single night outside Rome or touch raw flour. Imagine a divine HR handbook, several scrolls long. That's his daily burden. Still, for all the pomp and sanctity, some rituals sound suspiciously like superstition with a government grant. Take the augurs, for example, Rome's bird watchers of fate. Armed with curved staffs called lituus, they stand on hillsides or temple roofs, tracing invisible squares in the sky. Within those imaginary boundaries, they observe the flight of crows, hawks, or ravens, left or right, high or low. Every flap becomes data, a celestial spreadsheet guiding state policy. Before battles, before new colonies, before elections, even before plumbing projects, the augurs must approve. You can picture a senator tapping his foot impatiently while a bird refuses to appear. "We can't proceed," says the augur solemnly. "The signs are unclear." Bureaucracy meet metaphysics. Still, the augurs wield incredible influence. When they declare that the gods frown upon a motion in the Senate, the entire government freezes. The auspices are unfavorable, they say, and that's it. Debate over. Historians still argue whether the augurs truly believed in their own rituals or simply learned to weaponize them for politics. And then there are the haruspices, a word that sounds like a sneeze but carries serious weight. Imported from Etruria, these specialists peer into the future not through stars or birds, but through entrails. A freshly sacrificed animal, usually a sheep, is opened with careful reverence. Its liver, lungs, and heart are inspected for divine clues. A blemish here, a swelling there, and the priest frowns knowingly. The gods are displeased. The irony is that while this sounds gruesome, the Romans found it comforting. The entrails were orderly, interpretable, a tangible dialogue with unseen powers. To them, it wasn't macabre, it was methodical. And, sometimes, their methods were endearingly bizarre. There's the Pularius, the caretaker of the sacred chickens, Rome's most feathered oracles. Before major naval battles, generals consult the hens. If they eat greedily when the grain is scattered, That's a sign of divine approval. If they refuse, well, cancel your invasion. Once, the Roman admiral, Publius Claudius Pulcher, faced such a situation during the First Punic War. The chickens wouldn't eat. Frustrated, he allegedly shouted, "Then let them drink," and hurled the sacred birds overboard. The battle went poorly. His career worse. The moral? Never disrespect chickens blessed by Jupiter. As you drift deeper into this world of ritual precision, you start to notice something quietly profound beneath the spectacle. Every ceremony, whether it's the pontifex noting the date or the augur squinting at clouds, is about maintaining a cosmic equilibrium. Rome sees itself as bound by pax deorum, the peace of the gods. Break that peace, and disasters follow. Plagues, droughts, military defeat. And yet the boundaries between religion and politics blur constantly. The augurs and pontifices are often senators themselves, juggling piety and power like two weights on the same scale. A good omen can justify conquest. A bad omen can delay it conveniently until the legions are ready. The Emperor Augustus, master of subtle control, understood this perfectly. Declaring himself Pontifex Maximus, he didn't abolish old beliefs, he absorbed them, rebranding divine authority as imperial policy. The gods were still there, but now somehow they wore Roman togas. Even private citizens participate in this delicate cosmic contract. In small courtyards, household lares and kanates, little clay gods guarding family and pantry, receive offerings each morning. A pinch of flour, a drop of wine, a whispered word. The act connects the humblest home to the grandest temple. Everyone, from emperor to baker, keeps one wary eye on the heavens. But not all Romans take the rituals seriously. Philosophers like Cicero, himself an augur, occasionally roll their eyes at the system's contradictions. If one augur meets another and they can both keep from laughing, it's a miracle. Still, the ceremonies continue because Rome is built not just on stone and law, but on the comforting rhythm of repeated gestures. In a way, these rituals are sleepwalks through sacred choreography, practiced so long that belief becomes muscle memory. They keep Rome grounded, ticking in harmony with invisible wills. And even when skepticism grows, when imported Greek philosophy whispers new doubts, most Romans still bow their heads just in case. Picture it again. The forum glowing in lamplight, shadows moving across marble columns, the scent of burned offerings mingling with city smoke. Somewhere, a priest checks the sky. A raven circles once, twice, then glides eastward. The crowd murmurs, a good sign. The ceremony continues. And as the last echo of chanting fades, you realize how fragile the whole system is. A vast, invisible web of prayers, omens, and interpretations. Yet for centuries, it holds Rome steady, through drought and war, plague and triumph. Perhaps it's not the gods who need the rituals, but the Romans themselves, those restless humans craving a sense of control in a world ruled by thunder and fate. So they keep watching the skies, keep feeding the chickens, keep tracing invisible lines across eternity. And in that devotion, half faith, half habit, it lies the enduring heartbeat of Roman religion. Across the empire, the Roman gods begin to travel and change. Once they had been parochial creatures, bound to hills and hearths, rooted in the soil of Latium. Jupiter ruled the skies over Rome, Mars watched the fields, and Vesta's flame burned in the forum. But now legions march to Britain, Egypt, Syria, and beyond, and with them go altars, banners, and statues. Rome's gods become imperial citizens, crossing rivers and deserts, learning new tongues, acquiring new faces. As the empire expands, so does its spiritual vocabulary. A Roman stationed in Alexandria might pray to Jupiter in the morning and offer incense to the goddess Isis by nightfall. In Londinium, a centurion might scratch a quick plea to Mithras on a wall before heading into the cold. In Gaul, Mercury is worshipped with a local twist. Horned, wild, half-Celtic, half-Roman. It's faith by fusion, and the Romans love it. Their genius lies not in inventing gods, but in absorbing them. They take what works and rebrand it. It's the religious equivalent of empire building. Annex, adapt, absorb. At first, this seems like tolerance, a kind of divine multiculturalism. Rome famously declares that as long as you honor its own gods, and the emperor, of course, you may keep yours. But this easy syncretism has a political edge. It's a way of soft power, ensuring conquered peoples see themselves reflected in Rome's pantheon. A Gallic tribe that once prayed to Lugos now finds Mercury looking suspiciously familiar. The Egyptians who once sang hymns to Isis now find her seated beside Venus, smiling. Still, not all divine imports blend smoothly. Some shake the empire to its foundations. Take the goddess Isis, for example, born in the fertile myths of Egypt, motherly and mysterious. When her cult arrives in Rome in the 1st century BCE, she's exotic, alluring, dangerous to some. Her followers chant secret hymns, wear linen robes, and purify themselves with Nile water. Her temples, filled with incense and music, feel unlike anything in Rome's orderly religious life. The cult offers something the old gods rarely do: emotional intimacy, personal salvation, the promise that the soul can live again beyond death. For a city of conquerors haunted by mortality, that promise is intoxicating. But the Senate hates it. The Isis cult is banned several times, her temples demolished, yet every time she returns, stronger, more beloved. Even Roman women, often excluded from priestly roles, find freedom in her worship. By the time of the empire, Isis becomes almost mainstream. Statues of her appear in villas, her name whispered in Latin prayers. And alongside her, another figure rises from the east, Mithras, the god of light and contract, adored by soldiers. His story begins in Persia, travels through Anatolia, and finds new life beneath Roman soil. Quite literally beneath, because Mithraic temples, Mithraea, are built underground. Picture it: torchlight flickering on painted walls, the scent of smoke and sweat, men gathered in hushed devotion. They share bread and wine, reenact cosmic battles, and initiate new members in secret rites. At the heart of every Mithraeum stands a vivid image: Mithras slaying the sacred bull, blood transforming into the life of the world. Historians still argue whether this scene symbolizes creation, redemption, or simply good triumphing over darkness. To the soldiers, it's more practical than philosophical. Mithras represents loyalty, courage, and fraternity, values every legionary understands. In their harsh frontier life, far from Rome's marble calm, the Mithraeum becomes a home of the spirit. Yet these new gods don't merely coexist with the old, they reshape them. Jupiter gains the beard and wisdom of Greek Zeus. Venus absorbs Aphrodite's grace. Mars starts to look suspiciously like the Eastern god of war, Baal. Even the imperial cult itself, worship of the emperor as divine, draws from this melting pot. Augustus, with his carefully curated image, becomes a living Jupiter on Earth, his temples echoing those of Isis and Mithras. In this way, Rome becomes not just an empire of land, but of gods. Each conquered people contributes a fragment of divinity, adding to the empire's growing pantheon. Temples multiply like embassies of faith. The Capitoline Triad in one city, Serapis in another, Cybele's temple ringing with drums somewhere in between. Still, beneath the glittering surface of inclusion lies anxiety. How many gods can Rome contain before it loses itself? Some senators grumble that the old ways are being diluted. Others shrug. Better too many gods than too few. But for ordinary Romans, religion has never been static. They don't fret about theological contradictions. If one god fails to help, another might. A prayer is a transaction, not a creed. The universe is a marketplace of divine services, and Rome is its capital. Among all these imported faiths, one stands out for its mystery and persistence. The Great Mother, Cybele. Her worship, brought from Asia Minor, comes with ecstatic rites, drumming and dancing. Her priestess, the Galli, renounce masculinity altogether in service to the goddess. It's shocking, unsettling, and yet, for many Romans, strangely magnetic. Cybele's presence suggests that chaos and order must coexist, that the human heart needs both discipline and release. The old pragmatic religion of Jupiter's oaths and Mars's fields cannot satisfy that hunger forever. People crave emotion, connection, meaning, things bureaucracy can't provide. And so the empire's spiritual map begins to tilt eastward. Temples grow darker, rituals deeper, the promise of afterlife more vivid. A quiet revolution unfolds not through armies, but through worship. When Roman emperors start feeling insecure about all this divine competition, they don't ban the new gods outright. They adapt again. The Emperor Aurelian in the 3rd century CE declares Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, as Rome's supreme deity, a cosmic compromise meant to unite East and West under one radiant symbol. Temples to Sol gleam across the empire, golden mosaics catching the light. Festivals are set on December 25th, the rebirth of the sun after winter's darkness. You can feel where this might be headed. Because in the shadows of this sprawling pantheon, small groups began to gather around yet another new god, one not of marble or myth, but of compassion and resurrection. A god who speaks of forgiveness rather than victory. But that's for another night. For now, the Roman world glitters with every belief imaginable. In the alleys of Antioch, incense curls before a statue of Apollo. In a tavern in Gaul, someone mutters a prayer to Mercury for luck. On a ship bound for Spain, a soldier fingers a small bronze of Mithras. And back in Rome, as dawn rises over the Forum, an Egyptian priest of Isis grips the sun, the same light that once shone on the banks of the Nile. This is Rome at its most cosmopolitan, a city of 1,000 rods, all jostling for space beneath the same sky. Its empire may stretch from Britain to the Red Sea, but its true borders are invisible, drawn by faith and imagination. And perhaps that's what keeps Rome alive so long, not just its armies or laws, but its ability to believe in everything, to turn even foreign gods into Roman citizens. You can almost hear the hum of prayers in 100 languages, the rustle of robes, the murmur of devotion in markets and temples alike. The empire breathes in many voices, but exhales in one, a soft, endless invocation. Dei Romani, protect us all. The Forum at dawn gleams like a stage. Columns cast long shadows, statues glow faintly gold, and above it all rises the image of a man, not quite mortal anymore. He stands in perfect contrapposto, one hand raised in eternal gesture, the other clutching a globe. His gaze is serene, detached, almost divine. The inscription beneath reads not Caesar Augustus, but Divus Augustus, the divine Augustus. And just like that, Rome's emperors learn a trick the gods themselves once mastered: how to be immortalized in stone before the flesh even cools. The deification of emperors begins as a cautious experiment and ends as imperial policy. Julius Caesar is the first to cross the threshold. After his assassination in 44 BCE, a bright comet appears in the sky during the funeral games held in his honor. The people cheer. There, it's Caesar's soul ascending to the heavens. A convenient sign, perhaps too convenient. But perception becomes reality. The Senate officially declares him a god, Divus Julius. Temples rise, priests are appointed. A new religion, born not of myth but of politics, takes shape. Augustus, ever the careful strategist, takes note. He doesn't rush to claim divinity himself, not openly. Instead, he lets his adopted father's new celestial status shine down on him. He styles himself the Divi Filius, meaning the son of a god. It's subtle, brilliant branding. He inherits heaven's legitimacy without committing outright blasphemy. Jupiter still reigns above, but Augustus now rules the world below with divine sanction. This idea that mortal rulers could embody divine power wasn't new. Pharaohs had done it for millennia. Greek kings had flirted with it too, but Rome, in typical fashion, systematizes it. It becomes part ceremony, part propaganda, part genuine awe. When an emperor dies, the Senate votes on his godhood. It's democracy's final irony. Divinity by committee. Fires are lit, incense burns, and if the omens agree, the emperor's soul is said to ascend on the wings of an eagle. A column or temple soon follows, dedicated to the newly divine. But not every emperor makes the cut. Some, shall we say, fail their auditions. Caligula, for example, doesn't wait for the Senate's posthumous approval. He declares himself a living god. Temples to his divinity are built while he's still breathing. He orders statues of himself placed among the Olympians and insists that priests sacrifice to him. When the Nile floods unusually well one year, Caligula takes credit. "See," he boasts, "even the river obeys me." It doesn't end well. Historians still argue whether Caligula truly believed in his own divinity or just enjoyed the chaos it caused. Perhaps both. The divine mask can be intoxicating once worn too long. Then comes Nero, performer, poet, and, occasionally, emperor. He takes the stage like a god of theater, strumming his lyre while Rome burns. He too dabbles in deification while alive, depicting himself as Apollo, god of light and music. His image floods the empire on coins, a propaganda campaign in silver and bronze. But when power slips, so does the illusion. Nero dies not in divine glory, but in hiding, whispering the words, "What an artist dies in me." Still, for every mad emperor, there's a calculated one who understands the divine game as performance. Domitian, for instance, calls himself Dominus et Deus, meaning Lord and God. He demands it not out of insecurity, but as political theater. If emperors are to hold an empire of 70 million together, reverence helps more than reason. The imperial cult becomes Rome's most efficient propaganda machine. In every corner of the empire, from the dunes of Africa to the damp forts of Britannia, shrines to the emperor appear. Citizens offer incense before statues, not out of personal devotion, but civic duty. Participation equals loyalty, refusal, treason. This, incidentally, becomes a problem for a small, stubborn sect from Judea, whose followers refuse to burn incense before Caesar's image. But that's a story soon to arrive on the horizon. For now, the emperor's likeness is everywhere, in temples, mosaics, silverware, even the military standards carried by legions. He is Jupiter's reflection, Apollo's heir, Mars' chosen. His voice carries divine weight, literally law. When he speaks, the Senate records it in marble. When he dies, poets compare him to Hercules or Romulus ascending to join the stars. You can almost picture the ritual. The funeral pyre towering high on the field of Mars, the smell of cedar smoke rising into a violet dusk. As the flames climb, a wax effigy of the emperor is lifted upward by hidden machinery toward the heavens. Someone releases an eagle. It spirals skyward, wings flashing in the firelight. The crowd gasps. There he goes! The emperor has become a god. Or, at least, the Senate says so. And what happens if a ruler was cruel, incompetent, or simply unlucky? Simple. Damnatio memoriae. His memory is condemned, his statue smashed, his name erased from inscriptions. No godhood for him, oblivion instead. Even the gods of Rome must have some standards. But the line between worship and politics keeps blurring. The Emperor Hadrian, cultured and melancholy, deifies his beloved Antinous after the young man's mysterious drowning in the Nile. Cities across the empire build temples to the new god. Statues depict him as a second Apollo. Historians still debate whether Hadrian's grief was personal, political, or spiritual. Perhaps all three. But it marks a turning point, private emotion bleeding into public religion. Meanwhile, coins begin to speak in theology. On one side, the emperor's face. On the other, messages like Providentia Augusti or Aeternitas. Every transaction becomes a tiny act of worship, every marketplace a temple of state propaganda. Even architecture becomes a sermon. The pantheon, rebuilt under Hadrian, may appear to honor all gods, but its perfect dome and celestial oculus suggests something more, the emperor himself as cosmic center. Walk beneath it and you feel small, awed, humbled, precisely as intended. This fusion of divinity and rule gives Rome a kind of political immortality. So long as emperors can reinvent themselves as gods, rebellion feels like heresy, dissent like sacrilege. Its power insulated by mythology. But there's a quiet irony running beneath it all. The more emperors claim divine status, the more they must act divine, patient, just, benevolent, or risk exposure as merely mortal men in costumes. The gods of old could thunder, rage, and cheat. The divine emperor must smile on cue. Still, for the citizens of Rome, this divine theater offers comfort. In a vast, chaotic empire, the emperor's image becomes a constant, a fixed star in the Roman sky. Whether feared or adored, he anchors the cosmic order. And for those gazing up at his marble likeness, gleaming, flawless, untouchable, perhaps that illusion of permanence is enough. Because in Rome, immortality isn't about living forever. It's about being remembered, sculpted, and spoken of in the same breath as the gods. And through marble, mosaic, and myth, the emperors achieve exactly that, divine or not.
It happens slowly, like twilight. At first, no one notices that the songs to Jupiter sound quieter,
or that the incense smoke in Vesta's temple rises thinner each year. The marble statues still gleam in the sun, the priests still recite their formulas, the festivals still arrive right on time. But something beneath the rhythm begins to shift. Rome's gods are not overthrown in a single stroke, they simply begin to fade. The empire that once stretched across continents now stretches its faiths as well, too far, too thin. The gods of Olympus, of hearth and harvest, find themselves in a crowd of newcomers. Mithras still keeps his underground followers. Isis glows in Egyptian sanctuaries. Sol Invictus shines from imperial coins. Yet even these divine imports begin to blur into something else, something quieter and radical. A single god, unseen and uncarved, who asks not for offerings, but for faith. In small gatherings, in back rooms, in catacombs beneath the city, people start whispering prayers to this new god. They light candles, share bread, and speak of a man who died on a cross yet rose again. It's a strange tale to Roman ears, a god who suffers, who loves the poor, who rejects power, a god who forgives. At first, no one cares. Rome has 1,000 gods. What's one more? But this one refuses to play by the old rules. His followers won't offer incense to the emperor. They won't join public sacrifices. They meet in secret, speak in symbols, fish, doves, hidden signs carved into walls. Their refusal to worship the state's gods feels like rebellion. And so persecution begins. Torches flicker in the arenas. Accusations fly, cannibalism, sorcery, treason. Yet each execution creates not fear, but fascination. A faith that teaches mercy even in pain has an allure the thunderbolts of Jupiter never managed. Historians still argue whether Christianity spread because of theology or because the old religion had simply grown tired. The rituals of the augurs, the chants of the pontiffs, all that ceremony had become rote, mechanical. People needed something that spoke to the heart. Meanwhile, the empire itself begins to crack. Economic strain, civil wars, barbarian raids. Rome grows weary. Its gods, tied to conquest and glory, feel suddenly fragile. What use is Mars when the legions lose? What good is Jupiter's favor when the Tiber floods your home? And then comes a turning point, a moment both political and spiritual. In the early 4th century, Emperor Constantine marches into battle beneath a new symbol, the cross. He claims to have seen it in the sky, blazing above the sun with the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "In this sign you will conquer." He wins, and everything changes. The Edict of Milan, 313 CE, legalizes Christianity. Temples once hidden now open their doors. Churches rise in cities where altars of Apollo once stood. Bishops replace augurs. Processions of hymns replace the sacred chickens. And in 380 CE, under Theodosius, Christianity becomes the empire's official faith. Rome, the mother of 1,000 gods, now bows to one. The old temples don't all fall at once. Some become granaries, others courts, others simply empty shells. The Vestal virgins, who for centuries tended the sacred flame of the city, are disbanded. Their fire, symbolic of Rome's eternity, goes out for the last time. In the silence that follows, one can almost imagine the faint hiss of smoke like a sigh. Still, the transition is not destruction, but transformation. Many pagan rituals survive, quietly dressed in new names. Saturnalia becomes Christmas cheer. Spring festivals of fertility turn into Easter's rebirth. Even the saints take on roles the old gods once filled. Soldiers call on St. George where they once prayed to Mars. Mothers invoke Mary instead of Juno. The divine simply changes costume. In a way, Rome's genius for adaptation never dies. It absorbs this new god, as it once absorbed the Greek and the Egyptian. The cross rises above the same stones that once echoed with hymns to Venus. Basilicas borrow the architecture of temples. Priests wear vestments inspired by old Roman togas. The past lingers, hidden beneath the chants of the new faith. But not everyone welcomes this peace. Philosophers like Julian the Apostate, emperor for a brief, flickering moment in the 4th century, tried to revive the old gods. He sacrifices in public, rebuilds shrines, and writes with fervor about the beauty of polytheism. But it's too late. The tide has turned. His gods, noble and ancient, are fading echoes in a city now filled with bells and psalms. Imagine walking through Rome around the year 400. The marble temples still stand, vast, silent, weathered. Grass grows between their steps. Children play where senators once offered sacrifice. Across the forum, you hear the toll of a Christian bell, soft, steady, new. The air smells of wax instead of incense, of bread instead of blood. The old priests, if any remain, walk quietly, their vestments folded away, their titles meaningless now. But the myths, curiously, do not die. They retreat into language, into art, into memory. Poets still speak of Jupiter's thunder. Painters still dream of Venus rising from the sea. Even Christian scholars quote Virgil, not realizing that in doing so they keep pagan breath alive. In rural hills of Italy, old superstitions persist. Offerings of wine to household spirits, prayers whispered at crossroads. The people may call themselves Christian now, but the countryside still hums with the ghosts of old gods. The Romans once called this religio, the careful observance of tradition. And in a sense, that instinct, to honor, to connect, to hope, never fades. The gods, after all, are ideas, and ideas, once born, rarely die. They linger in stone carvings, in the names of planets, in the months of the year. Mars still rules March, Janus still opens January, Venus still graces the dawn. The empire may crumble, the temples may fall, but the mythology endures, reshaped, repurposed, reimagined through every age that follows. Perhaps that's the truest Roman miracle, not eternal power, but eternal storytelling. For even as the basilicas rise and the cross glows gold above the Palatine Hill, the whispers of the old world remain in the wind. A rustle of laurel leaves, a distant clap of imagined thunder, a goddess's sigh hidden in the fountain's song. Rome changes its gods, but not its need for them.
Listen closely, and you'll still hear Rome breathing, not through temples or sacrifices, but through whispers that thread their way across centuries, across marble ruins, across the tongues of poets and painters, and now across the quiet of this very moment. Though the empire fell long ago, its gods and stories never truly left. They merely learned new languages, took on new forms, and wandered into the hearts of those who kept dreaming. You can still see them everywhere, if you know how to look. In the world above, the night sky carries their names: Mars, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, still moving in their eternal courses, still ruling the heavens in ways no emperor ever could. Every planet is a memory, every orbit a hymn. Astronomers speak their names without even thinking, their syllables ancient and divine, whispered through telescopes instead of temples. On Earth,
the same gods still linger in stone and paint. Walk through the galleries of Florence, Paris, or London, and there they stand. Venus rising from her seashell, Apollo bathed in gold, Bacchus crowned with vines. Their faces are immortalized in oil and marble, their myths retold in brushstrokes and frescoes. The Renaissance, that great rekindling of human wonder, began in no small part by rediscovering these very figures, breathing life back into what the Middle Ages had half forgotten. Even our language still glows with their echoes. To have a Herculean task is to borrow strength from a demigod. A Venus is beauty itself. A martial spirit recalls Mars. Mercurial minds are quick and clever, like Mercury himself. The days of the week bear their lineage too. Tuesday for Mars, Wednesday for Mercury, Thursday for Jupiter, Friday for Venus. Every time we check a calendar, we are quietly tracing the map of Roman faith. The arts, too, carry their pulse. Shakespeare wrote of Venus and Adonis, Ovid's ancient verses echoing through Elizabethan sound. Painters from Botticelli to Rubens to Bernini sculpted love, rage, and divinity into form. The poets of later ages found in those myths an endless well. Keats wrote of Psyche, Tennyson of Ulysses, and even modern films and novels breathe their spirit anew. We tell their tales now in new mediums, glowing screens, illustrated pages, whispered bedtime stories, but the heart of the myth is unchanged. Rome's gods live on in the imagination, not as deities to be feared, but as archetypes to be understood. They are pieces of the human psyche, Mars our drive, Venus our desire, Mercury our wit, Saturn our melancholy. Each one a fragment of ourselves, eternal as emotion, restless as time. The Romans gave them names, we give them meanings. And sometimes the myths return in unexpected ways. A statue uncovered from the earth, its marble eyes blank but somehow alive. A ruined temple beneath a modern city, columns rising beside steel and glass. A poet finds a story of love and loss older than her country, and in rewriting it, she keeps it alive. Rome's memory has seeped into the foundations of civilization itself, woven into our art, our words, our sense of beauty and destiny. Even in faith, its touch remains. Cathedrals were built where temples once stood, but both share the same reverence for light, the same yearning for the eternal. The Virgin's serene gaze borrows something from Juno's dignity. Angels with gilded wings echo Mercury's flight. The line between pagan and sacred blurs until all that remains is wonder, humanity's endless reaching toward the divine. And so, in the hush of night, as your mind drifts between waking and dream, you might feel those echoes still moving like tides. Jupiter's thunder hums faintly in the storm. Venus shines above the sea, her light trembling on the waves. Mars rides through the red dusk, his chariot trailing dust and fire. The gods no longer demand offerings, they ask only to be remembered. It is in stories like this one that they find their quiet immortality. Each retelling is a small ritual, a flicker of the old sacred flame. You too become part of the chain that links ages, from the Vestal tending her hearth to the listener resting here tonight, eyes heavy, heart open, letting myth become memory. For stories are the true temples of humankind. They crumble slower than stone. And somewhere between the rustle of leaves and the sigh of the sea, the voices of Rome still murmur, "We are still here." Sleep now, with their echoes wrapped around you like a soft cloak. The gods watch not as rulers, but as memories, eternal, gentle, waiting in the stars. Their world has ended, yes, but their stories never will.